But this is the last one. It's session number 9, contract to close. And, you know, here's what I'll say. We always start this course with what do successful agents do every day. They grow their business. They manage their business. Certainly contract to close is on this running your business side of things. And the thing that I guess I just want people to think about is there's a big role change that happens. There's a transition that happens. When you've got a contract that's signed, whether you represent the buyer or you represent the seller, you kind of move from a sales position into a project management position. And it's a very different set of skills, right? It's a very different set of skills to shepherd the contract all the way to the closing table than it is to kind of get the contract put together and to create marketing and to show homes and to get agreement. And, you know, that's a lot of sales skills for sure. But project management is different. And I'm going to tell you that this is where you earn your stripes, because sadly, more transactions fail than you would possibly imagine. Nationally, the average is 1 out of every 4 transactions that survives a Turner review fails. 1 out of 4. And that is a really high number. And I think there's a lot of different things that influence that number. I think one of those is how well we've done helping buyers and sellers anticipate properly what to expect. Are their expectations realistic in terms of how things are going to get handled? I think one of the things that influences that is the demand in the marketplace. We are seeing right now that deals are so hard to put together because there's so little inventory and because there is so much competition that, quite honestly, on a buyer's side, they're not usually going to blow this deal up. If there's an inspection issue that comes along that creates some stress, it was so hard to get one that they're usually going to try to work things out. However, on the seller side, what happens is when there's a lot of demand, if there's the perception that the buyers are becoming too difficult to work with, it's not uncommon for the seller just to cancel the deal and to go back out into the marketplace, right? So learning how to kind of manage emotional expectations through the project management phase is where you really earn your stripes. This is the part of the HGTV show that they never show you. What they do show you is the fun part, is showing the house and writing the contract and getting the offer accepted. And then they skip right over to the after party where the agent is sitting with the sellers or the buyers and they're in their new home. But we've got to kind of spend a little time talking about this project management step. So that said, let's just get right on into it. First thing we want to do is we want to think about timelines and what's involved in keeping the transaction together. You know, I showed here a checklist. This is a listing agent contract to close checklist, and it doesn't actually exist in the Ignite toolkit that I've pointed you to before. This checklist actually exists in the Win with Sellers course. If you go on KW University, there's a course called Win with Sellers. There's another course called Win with Buyers. And if you go into both of those course materials, you're going to come up with contract to close checklists for both buyer side deals and seller side deals. And I think it's really important to have a checklist to work from. I used a photograph. I inserted a photograph there of a pilot in the pre-flight checklist, kind of just going through all the different steps. You know, what's really important is that you don't miss anything. If you miss a step on a commercial airliner in your checklist and you have a problem at 36,000 feet, it's a problem. It's a big problem. And what happens a lot of times is that as long as things are going smoothly, as long as you're not too busy, as long as you're not too distracted, once you learn what needs to be done, you can kind of remember and you kind of just go through the paces and you know what to do next and you know what to do next. But I can tell you from personal experience that when you get busy or you have another emergency in your life or for some reason you're distracted, if you don't have a checklist to guide you through the process, it's really easy to miss steps. And I have been involved in transactions where one of the agents missed something and we got to the closing table and that thing wasn't done and it caused a lot of problems, right? So I don't want that to be you. I want you to get a checklist and work your way through all the different steps, right? Now, the checklists that we give you in the Win with Buyers course and in the Win with Sellers course, they are pretty generic. And closings in each geographic area in each state are handled a little bit differently. So what I would encourage you to do is use this checklist as a starting point, as a template to start with. And then I'd encourage you to kind of go back and talk to the folks in your office, maybe some other agents who have been a little bit more experienced, maybe your sponsor. It's a pretty good chance that if you're in Keller Williams, you do have a sponsoring agent who helped you get connected here. If they're practicing real estate in New Jersey, perhaps they would have some thoughts in terms about what to add to the checklist. So we'll talk about some of that today, but I think the more you can kind of customize it to your own local needs, the better. But we do give you some starting off points. So take a look at these. And kind of what we want to do is we want to start by building timelines, right? And the checklist is nothing more than a timeline. What has to happen first? What has to happen second? When we work with the buyer's side, we're just going to kind of walk through a couple things here. First things that happens is we have an executed contract. And a contract is deemed fully executed when it's signed by all the parties and in the possession of all the parties, right? And once that contract is signed in New Jersey, we have a cooling off period of 3 business days that we call the attorney review period. Now remember, and I want to make sure that people are clear, attorney review 3 days, when we learned about 3-day attorney reviews, that doesn't mean that once the attorneys have it, they have to resolve any issues that they have within 3 days. It only means that you have 3 days to get the process started. If 3 business days come and go and you haven't had an attorney modify the contract, then it's legally binding the way that you wrote it. So the first thing we do in New Jersey is recognize that having an attorney review the contract is optional. It's not required. You have a fully legally executed contract, but in most parts of the country, and certainly in northern New Jersey, we do usually use an attorney. Now, that's not always true in the southern part of the state. Attorney review is not that common. Once you get down to maybe Burlington County and south, it tends to go directly to title companies, right, to kind of work out the particulars. But executed contract happens, attorney review closes, right? Once attorney review closes and the attorneys have agreed to all the modifications, now we've got a fully ratified and binding contract. The next thing in the timeline is that the buyers really need to get their financing lined up. In fact, if you really think that the attorney review is going to go smoothly, you don't anticipate any hiccups, it's best practice to really get the buyers and the lenders started with their process immediately, because there's a lot of documentation that needs to be provided. And certainly post the 2008 financial meltdown, the amount of documents that the lenders need has really escalated a lot. And then when you add all the changes with COVID on top of that, there's a lot of certification that needs to be provided to show that people still have a job, that they haven't been furloughed. Sometimes some of the lenders want to know what kinds of industries people work in, because if the perception is that someone is in an industry that could be vulnerable due to COVID and layoffs, that there might be some hesitation. So there's a lot of paperwork that needs to be provided. We want to make sure that we get our buyers to get that process started quickly. And we want to make sure that we've got a relationship with the lenders, right? Because if things need to be provided and we don't know the lenders, if they're part of a big national bank out in California somewhere, those lenders are not going to call us and give us updates as to what's going on. But when we're working with Bond Street and Atlantic Home Loans and New Jersey lenders and our partners, they'll keep you in the loop. And so get the lending process started. Certainly the buyers need to conduct a home inspection. And we know that the home inspection is not designed to find every single flaw that separates this house from new construction. In fact, the new construction sometimes has just as many flaws as anything else. What the contract states is that the home is being sold in as-is condition and that the buyers have seen it, right? I've seen a practice that's begun to happen in our crazy market right now, where there's so much demand and it's so much competition that buyers are beginning to submit offers sight unseen, with the hopes that if they get one accepted, they can go out and take a look at it. And in the attorney review timeline window, if they don't like the house, they can back out at that point. I get that, and there's nothing potentially illegal with that. However, what you're signing off on when the contract is being submitted is that the property is being sold as is, and it implies that they've seen it. And you're signing a document that says they've kind of seen it, right? So either way, be cognizant of that. I don't love the idea of sight unseen. I think that's not best practice, but I do know that it happens. You do have the opportunity, though, to do the inspection. And the inspection has to be scheduled within a specific timeline. And that timeline not only requires the inspection to be done, but that once the report comes back, that the buyers take a look at that report, have a conversation with you, have a conversation with their attorney, and decide if there's anything in that report that indicates a problem that they want to have remedied, right? And the inspection and the request for remediation have to be completed within the timeline on the contract. If the contract says that you have a 10-day inspection window, then 10 days has to not just be the inspection, but any requests, right? So make sure you're budgeting enough time for that. Certainly making sure that home insurance is obtained. You know, the lender isn't going to give the money at the closing table if they don't have verification of an insurance policy. Because God forbid, the moment that the property closes, if the property gets hit by lightning, you know, if it's not insured, the lender's at risk. I can share with you an unfortunate but very personal story of an investment property that I owned. Actually, I actually bought a place for my daughter to live in. The things you do to get your kids out of the house, right? But I bought this property. It was bank owned. It was foreclosed, and it was vacant for years. And the utilities were shut off. And at the time of the closing, there was a property management firm that was managing the property. At the time of the closing, the property manager went into the unit and turned all the utilities back on again, one of which happened to be the water. And what I didn't know, and what nobody really knew because the home inspector couldn't tell, is that the hot water heater had a massive leak in it. And when the water got turned on, it flooded the third floor unit that I had just purchased, which meant it flooded the second floor unit below it and the first floor unit below that. I owned the property for 4 hours and I had massive damage created by a hot water heater. You got to make sure that the insurance is in place, guys. And in that situation, it was a little unusual because the inspection was done without the utilities on, which is not ideal, but sometimes happens in a bank-owned property. But we've got, if there's a home warranty that's going to be put in place, we've got to make sure that gets ordered in time. All the different steps, we have to have a timeline, and the same holds true with the seller, right? Once an offer gets accepted, what does the seller need to do? Well, the seller is going to need to get a certificate of occupancy, any documents that the town requires to pass over title to the next buyer, the next owner. The seller has to do that. Certainly, they're going to have to deal with the inspection and make sure that the inspector can have access to the home to do the inspection, that the appraisal gets done and has access to the home. The seller doesn't schedule these things. These things are scheduled by other players. But when you're the seller side agent, you know they have to get done. And so you want to make sure that that timeline is moving along and these tasks are being accomplished, right? There's another thing that I would say, let's go back to buyer side for a second. On the buyer side, at some point, there's going to be a walkthrough, right? Right before the closing. The buyers are going to walk through the house. It's best practice to do that walkthrough after the sellers have moved out. And what you're looking for is that the home is being left in the kind of condition that you expect it to be in. The contract states that it has to be left in a very specific level of condition. Does anybody know what the contract says and how the property should be left for the buyers? Do you remember the language in the contract? The contract language says that the seller is going to leave the home empty in a broom swept condition. Broom swept, not scrubbed, you know. And, you know, one of the things that happens is when you go into a home that's been emptied out, all the furniture is gone, and it's broom swept, it doesn't show well. It doesn't look well. And sometimes when people go through the walkthrough, they start to notice things that they hadn't noticed before. And they want the seller to remediate those before they take possession. That's not really the purpose of the walkthrough. That's the purpose of seeing the house and inspecting the house. The walkthrough is to make sure that the utilities are working. I think it's good practice to make sure that all the water, you turn on all the water, all the sinks, none of them are leaking. I want to make sure that all the toilets flush, Because what I know happens sometimes is that as people are cleaning things up, they may throw a wad of paper towels down the toilet and they flush it down, and then the next guy in comes in, and if you got a massive backup, you got to make sure that the heat works, that the air conditioning works, and you want to walk through it and make sure that it's empty, that they've taken everything. A lot of times people leave stuff. I've seen sofas left where people didn't want to move them. I've seen broken down appliances left in the garage that people didn't want to move. If there's stuff like that, what you need to do is take a picture, send it to the attorneys, and it is something that the attorneys will negotiate at the closing table on how they're going to resolve that. Typically what happens is that the sellers do not get all of the proceeds of sale. Usually what happens is there's an agreed amount of money that's left in escrow, maybe $500 or so. And then the sellers are given a period of time to get that stuff out. And as soon as they can show that that stuff is out, then they get the rest of their money back, right? But you do the walkthrough. I think it's best practice sometimes to have the buyers sign off on a walkthrough sign off. We don't have a form specifically like that in the real estate community. Keller Williams doesn't have one. New Jersey Association doesn't have one. I just think I would create one. I would just write on a piece of paper and date it and say that, walkthrough was conducted at 125 Main Street on such and such a date, and that the buyers are accepting the house is empty and is in room swept condition. I would have them sign off on that, right? And put that in the file just to make sure that they've agreed that this is okay. What I don't want to have happen is for 2-3 days later for the buyers to come back. Now they're starting to get into the house and they start to see all kinds of things that are upsetting to them. And now they want to come back and relitigate. I want a piece of paper signed that says they walked through the house the last time they saw it and they're accepting it in the condition that it's in, right? So have your timelines, map out the timelines, and the checklists that exist will give you a good starting point for these timelines, right? Now, one of the things that I think is really important to do is in your timelines, there's certain kind of key moments. There's certain what I call developmental milestones. It's kind of like raising a child, And have you ever seen your friends with kids, with babies or toddlers or whatever it is, that the first time or that they hit some sort of special milestone, it's a big event and they celebrate it. And you see pictures on Facebook, Junior stood up for the first time or whatever it is. It's an important thing to celebrate. And I think they are important in development of a child's growth. But I also think that one of the things that's really important to do in a transaction is as you get over certain key hurdles, we're out of a turn of review. There's a key hurdle. We have negotiated all the inspection items and resolved those issues well. There's a key hurdle. I think it's a really good idea to kind of celebrate those in some way. And as the agent, you get to decide what that celebration looks like. But I've seen agents just do simple things like maybe, send a bouquet of flowers or an edible arrangement or something like that. Hey, congratulations, we got through this one. And they go and they do something to acknowledge it. Why I think that's important is because I think it strengthens the relationships. It strengthens the relationship that you have with your clients. And at the end of the day, we're not just trying to shepherd them through this transaction and get to a closing, but we're trying to build a relationship, because once this is over, we want to keep them in our database, in our world. We're going to stay in touch with them. We're going to continue to communicate with them and build a community around them. And I think that finding a way to acknowledge these transactional milestones is just a smart thing to do. And think about how that would fit for your brand. What would you do? I'm a food guy. So for me, a lot of times it was just to send a little package of something. There's a million companies that you can use that send stuff like, packages of English muffins and a couple jars of jam or something. Yeah, does it cost you $30 to do that? Sure it does. But you know what? I think that's something that you just factor in to your operational overhead and make sure that you have a chance to do those kinds of things, okay? Now, we've got these checklists and we've got this timeline kind of mapped out. I also think that we want to think about the key communication points, that we should probably put those on the checklist as well. Who needs to be checked in with at certain times? If the contract says that the buyers have 45 days to obtain their mortgage, I'm probably going to start having on my checklist, my timeline, to have communication with the parties involved in that. If I'm the listing agent and I have 45 days before the buyers are required to have their mortgage commitment, I'm probably going to check in with the buyer's agent at day 30 and say, hey, how's it going? You know, we're 30 days in. Are we on track? Is there anything that needs to happen? Does it look like we're on point here? If we're working with the buyers, right, I think we need to make sure that we can talk to our lenders. Hey, how are things going? Do you have everything that you need for underwriting? Is there anything that I can do to help grease the skids to make sure that we stay on point? I think it's important to think about having conversations like, when do we contact for movers, right? Because it might need a little bit of lead time to get these movers ready to go. And so we put those conversations with our sellers to remind them to talk to movers. We put those conversations to remind them to get their insurance. We put the conversations to remind them to kind of think about utility transfers, right? What we know with utilities like electric and water, it's mostly just switching one account to another account. However, if we have homes, for example, that have heating oil in them, if you have a tank with heating oil in it, all the oil that's in that tank is actually the personal property of the seller. And so we need to have enough time to place a call to the heating oil company to have them come out and put a stick in that tank to measure how much oil is in there and calculate how much that oil is worth based on the current rate of sale of oil. Because the buyer has to buy that oil from the seller, and that's an adjustment that needs to happen at closing. And so that's a communication that has to be, plotted for. All the different conversations. And guys, for me, what I always thought was best practice when I thought about my co-op agent is that we just scheduled regular communication with the agent on the other side. We're working as a team. We're pulling in the same direction. And guys, I know that sometimes you feel like you're doing all the work. I know that sometimes the other agent isn't pulling their share. And you know what? I get it. But at the end of the day, I kind of look at this as a marriage. And I guess what I mean by that is, in a marriage, you don't have two partners who are 50-50. You're either 100% on 100% or it's not going to fly. It's not going to work. If I have to do 100% and you do 0 in this transaction, it doesn't matter. I'm going to make sure it gets done because it's in my client's best interest to get it done. And so if I have to do things that are normally the other side's, so be it. But it has to be done. But the best practice is just to build in regular communication points. And the same holds true with our clients. Regular update conversations with our clients. What's happening? Here's what's going on. This is what we expect next. Plot that communication right onto your checklists. And then the same holds true with documentation, right? There's documents that you have to make sure that you have in all of your files for the documents to be complete. And I think I can actually go into chat here, and I think I can actually upload a checklist of all the documents that you need, which you can download for yourself. So stick with me for just 1 second, because I think I have this right here on my laptop. It should be right here, and then it should be in this next file here. Here we go. All right. Now it's going to say in chat, you should see something that says .loop requirements. And .loop is kind of the filing system that we use, and we're transitioning out of .loop and into DocuSign. But the documents are all still there. And so it's just a checklist. You can download that. If for some reason you're having problems with the download, reach out to me and I can get this to you. What is missing from this set of, from this PDF are the COVID documents. This was created before we got blessed with COVID. And so we need to make sure that we've got all the COVID disclosures, right? When somebody goes into a house, when somebody's listing a house, we need to get those COVID documents signed. Those are missing from this list, but otherwise it's pretty complete. And you want to make sure that all the different documents that you need to have a complete and full file are there, right? If there's something that needs to be completed that you don't have, go get it signed and get it completed and get it in the file. Because your brokers are going to need to review these files. Your office is going to need to review these files to make sure that it's complete. And so get those documents, put it right on your timeline to have checkpoints to make sure that you're current with all your paperwork. What happens sometimes and it's a little crazy making for your office. What happens sometimes is that an agent shows up with a closing check and a commission and a HUD document that says, woohoo, I just had a closing. They ring the bell, everybody's happy. And then when they go back to review the file, they're like, I don't see a file here. Oh yeah, I didn't do any of the paperwork yet. I'm working on it. No, I can't pay you if I don't have a file, right? So make sure that that document is current. It just makes everybody's life easier. And if you have questions around that, go back to your agent services folks in your offices and they'll direct you to the right person who can help do some of the training around documents. But this form that's in chat, you should be able to download and use it as a guide. Any questions around that? Can you download that form okay? Going once, going twice? All right, I'm going to assume that silence means you're good. Let's keep moving. I'm a big fan of doing something unexpected. And what does that mean? Well, there's a phrase that we use. It's a bold law. And when we teach bold, some of you will hear this. It says spontaneity is a conditioned reflex. Now that sounds kind of strange. How could something spontaneous be a conditioned reflex? Well, here's what that means. You know, as I mentioned before about celebrating those little milestone events, doing something that strengthens the relationship, I think one of the things that is true about our work, the work that we do, is it's very transaction oriented. And when things are transactional, you know, everybody does the same things. You know, think about the travel industry for a second. You know, travel industry in terms of booking flights and booking rental cars and all those different steps in the transaction of a trip, you know, transactional things can ultimately be automated. You saw what happened in the travel industry when automation and technology came in. We saw the disappearance of travel agents for a long time. And that didn't last forever. Probably 2012 was the height of the low point in travel agents. But what began to happen was, just because people could automate this and they didn't need to go to the travel agent to book a flight or to book a car, what began to happen is they started to book their own trips. And then what began to happen is they started to get to where they were going and saying, this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. This is not as nice as I had hoped. I should have talked to someone. I wish I had talked to someone who could have kind of given me some firsthand experience around this. And that's when sites like Travelocity and other places started to do more client reviews, but it also ushered back the return of the agent, because agents then specialized in cruises or certain kinds of trips, and people began to go to specialists to make sure that things got done and things got done well, and yet it's still a very transactional business. That said, when we're doing transactional things, if we're going to create a great experience for people, if we're going to create a great relationship with people, we have to do the transactional things differently. We have to do the transactional things in different ways to the best of our ability. And I think we have to do some things that they didn't even see coming. Some little special things that we did that kind of caused them to say, that was so cool. I can't believe you did that. Some examples that I've given in other classes, and I'll just share maybe one or two with you now so you kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. There's one that I call the popcorn letter. And here's how the popcorn letter works. This was something that I had learned from a colleague of mine who was actually a real estate trainer in Pennsylvania. And I heard her talk about this at a training convention. She said what she likes to do is recognize the fact that sometimes when buyers get under contract, there's this moment of panic. There's this moment of buyer's remorse. And it's commonplace, especially if the buyers then are super excited and they go and talk to their friends and their family, and their mom and dad are like, you spent how much money? Oh my God. And then they start to second guess themselves. Oh, maybe I made a mistake. It happens way more than you think. One of the reasons why so many deals fail is because of buyer remorse. And so one of the things that she used to like to do to anticipate that and kind of head it off at the pass, well, there's two things. One was that she got these little packages of Tic Tacs. And God's honest truth, this is what she did. She would go to the store, get a package of Tic Tacs, and then she would go to a Staples store, and she would get a label page, you know, a box of labels, not the mailing labels, but the ones that are kind of 3 inches by 2 inches or whatever it is. And she would write in big, bold-faced type on the label, buyer remorse pills. And she would take that label and she would wrap it around the Tic Tac container. And the reason why she did that is then when she went out to show homes, what was her practice is that she would say, look, we're going to find a great home, and I'm super excited when we do this. But one of the things that's going to happen is that there's a good chance that when we get under contract, you might panic. You might have a little bit of, oh my God, what have I done? So I'm going to give you these buyer remorse pills right now. I want you to just take them and understand they're really powerful. Don't let your kids get these. Put them in a safe place. But I want you to know where those are. Because in that moment, when you start to second guess yourself, I want you to go take one of these buyer remorse pills. They're powerful. They're minty, but they're strong. Give me a call back and we'll talk about it. And it was just this little ritual thing, and they laughed and it sounded like all good fun. But you know, here's what happens is when that moment happened that they started to panic. You know what they thought? You know what? She said this was going to happen. Oh my God, and it kind of recontextualizes that whole thing from something that I should be afraid of to something that's just part of the process. And it loses some of its emotional charge. Another thing that she did was the popcorn letter that I talked about. When she got out of going into attorney review, when she got a fully executed contract with her buyers, she would send them a package. And she would deliver a package that included a package of microwave popcorn, a package of a bottle of wine, or sparkling, juice if they don't drink, and to show you how old it was, a Blockbuster video card. And what she wrote in the letter was, congratulations on getting your offer accepted. This is super exciting. If you're like a lot of folks, and as we've talked about before, there's a chance that at some point you may start to say, oh my God, look how much money this is. What have I done? Am I really sure? And start to second guess yourself. I can appreciate that. That's all part of the process. But what you need to do tonight is just relax. What I want you to do is go rent a movie. I want you to pop some popcorn, pour a glass of wine, and just trust that we've got your back. You've got a great agent. We've got a great attorney. We're going to get you a great home inspector. You've got a whole team behind you that is going to take good care of you. Tonight, you just take care of you and know that we're right here for you. And that's what she said. Now, let me ask you, anybody want to unmute or put in chat? If you were a buyer and got a letter package like that, how would you feel? How would you feel?
This agent rocks.
This agent rocks. And even if you weren't having buyer's remorse, like, that was so cool. I can't believe that you did that, right? Doing things like that, unexpected little things, maybe one, maybe two, a couple of them throughout the course of the transaction is really important because it helps people to feel special. It helps people to feel cared for, and it's so critical to strengthening that relationship. The term spontaneity is a conditioned reflex. What that means is that feels so spontaneous to the receiver, and yet it's just part of her checklist. She has it on her checklist to do. It's a conditioned reflex. It's planned for. And you need to kind of engineer a couple special little moments like that in the transaction. I'll give you one other because this is one of my favorites. Another friend of mine, and I have a lot of smart friends. I can't think of good stuff like this on my own, but I'm willing to steal from them and share with you. I had another friend of mine who, what she used to do was in that final week when people were getting ready to move, that week where you're packing and things are just chaotic. You can't find anything anymore. And the kids are stressed out and you're stressed out and everybody's kind of at each other's throat a little bit. It's not fun moving, guys. Moving is stressful. Well, what she used to like to do is in that week, she liked to call up her buyers and say, you know what? I know that things are really hectic for you right now. And I'm going to be in your neighborhood a little bit later on. I'd really love to bring dinner by for you guys. Would it be okay if I stopped by and brought you some dinner so that you don't have to worry about cooking tonight? What do you think her buyers would say? Most of them said, oh, you don't have to do that. That's really sweet, but we're okay. And she would insist. She would absolutely insist that she does it. And so here's what would happen. She would bring the dinner by and they would be so appreciative and so grateful. And when she walked in the home, they would look at her with this sort of wide-eyed, jaw-dropping look. And they would say to her, I can't believe that this is what you brought. Like, this is my favorite meal. This is my favorite thing in the world. Of all the things you could have brought, I can't believe you brought this. This is so cool. And it was just this magical moment. And it didn't happen by chance, because what her process was when she was showing homes with these buyers is at some point she would get to the kitchen on the tour of the home, and she would just start to ask some questions that just seemed so innocuous and so random. And one of the questions was, could you see yourself preparing a meal in this kitchen? And it didn't matter whether the answer was yes or no. That led to the follow-up question, what's your favorite thing to cook? And it didn't matter what they said. And led to the third question was, what's your favorite thing to eat? And it just seemed so conversational. And when she got the answer to what's your favorite thing to eat, she wrote it down, because she knew that later on she was going to ask to bring them dinner. And if she magically brought them their favorite thing to eat, it would look like freaking magic. And that's the moment that she was trying to create. That doesn't just happen. That's engineered. Spontaneity is a conditioned reflex. You got to think about doing a couple little magical things like that. And when you do, you will become what Seth Godin, the great marketer, calls a purple cow. You will become something that is just so unique that people can't wait to tell all their friends, right? You think about that buyer who got the popcorn letter and went back to work the next day and said, we finally got a house. And you won't believe how cool my agent is. That's what you're trying to create, right? When you get to the closing table and people now know that you've got this house and they say, yeah, how did it go? Oh my God, it was so great. This is the house of our dreams. You won't believe what my agent did. It was so cool. That's what you're trying to create, that word of mouth. Super, super important. Find a couple places to engineer those special moments, right? Now, I'll tell you, some of the best businesses of all time, they do that really well. Disney, the Four Seasons Hotel, there's lots of little places. There's lots of big places, rather, that leave little things like that, little unexpected things that they just do that you didn't see coming, that made you say, wow, I love this place. That's what you have to be in your business, right? Now, best practices around some other things. We've got to think about all the different places where the deal could blow up. We've got to think about who are the potential saboteurs. Who might have a stake in blowing this deal up? Maybe it's mom or dad who come out and say that we paid too much. Where are the pinch points where we know we could run into challenges around home inspection times, around getting financing done in the timeframes? And so what we have to think about is all the different places where there could be some risk in this deal falling apart, and anticipating it and having a plan for it. Having an absolute plan in place, talking about it, anticipating it, so that when it comes, we've already got a strategy, right? And, there's a million different places that a deal could blow up. It pays to sort of think about it. I remember one time seeing an interview with a sales trainer who said that what he used to do with his boss is, when he got a big contract, they would sit down, and he called it murder boarding. Where are the places where this deal could be murdered by somebody on the outside? Who possibly could blow this up? And how could we prevent it from happening? You want to really think through that. Now, in the course Shift, in the book Shift, right? Gary Keller and Jay wrote that back in the last market cycle Shift. There's a chapter, I believe it's chapter 12, that's called Bulletproofing Your Transaction. And it starts to kind of go through all the different places where your deal can blow up. And what are some of the ways that you can anticipate it, prevent it from happening, or deal with it quickly and efficiently if it does happen. And having a strategy so you don't have to think about it in real time is important. I'll give you an example of how I saw that play out in another industry. I had been in a great hotel. It was the Four Seasons Hotel in New York City. I was there for a training program. And I witnessed the concierge de-escalate a guest who was really angry about something. And I couldn't tell what, because the conversation was happening too far away from me. But I could tell that they were really hot and they were really animated. And as the concierge just kind of kept cool and she talked more, I could start to see the other person begin to calm down, begin to soften, begin to breathe. And before it was all said and done, I started to see that guest smiling and actually walked away from that interaction with kind of a little upbeat step in her step. And later on in the day, when I had an opportunity, I went up to the concierge and I said, I don't know exactly. I sort of saw from a distance that moment that happened earlier in the day with the guest. And I have to tell you that as a sales trainer, I just want to tell you, I thought you handled, I don't know what you did, but I thought you handled it really well because I saw how you were able to turn her around and keep her happy. And here's what she said to me, and this was really important. She said, one of the things that we do here at the Four Seasons is this concierge department meets on a regular basis, and we start to try to think about all the crazy things that could happen that could screw up somebody's stay. All the things that could happen that could cause someone to be disappointed. Maybe things that we did, maybe things that we had nothing to do with. But if somebody came and presented a problem, what would we do as a concierge to fix it? And she says, we brainstorm those all the time. And we dedicate time to thinking about it again and again and again. And she said, you know, this woman had kind of a strange, unique thing happen to her. And I wasn't sure when or ever if it would ever show up. But we talked about what would happen if someone presented this problem. And when it happened, we already had a pre-made solution. And because we knew what to do and we could solve her problem right away, she stayed happy, right? We got to think about that and think about all the places where these deals could go belly up and have a strategy for them. Shift is a great place to look at those tasks, right? But we know the key pinch points. They're around inspections. They're around financing. They're around meeting key deadlines, right? And that's why keeping that communication moving is so important. A couple things, do's and don'ts, places where deals can fall apart. Sometimes deals fall apart because buyers don't get warned about some funding issues. And we have to be proactive and put on our communication plot timeline that we have conversations with our buyers and say, look, when you're applying for a mortgage, you're not going to get the funding at the closing table if you make some mistakes. And so this isn't the time to change jobs, right? This is not the time to quit your job, especially in a COVID environment. But I can share with you, I had sold one of my very first transactions. I came out of healthcare and I had a nurse who worked with me who was in the St. Barnabas system where I was. And she was leaving to take a job in the Hunterdon Medical Center. And at that time, I was selling homes in sort of Hunterdon and Somerset County. And so she was buying her very first house. She didn't have one to sell. She lived in an apartment, but she was buying her first home. And I never counseled her about changing jobs before her financing came through. And here's what happened. She was leaving St. Barnabas to take an administrative role. It was an increase in salary. It was a more responsibility. It was a great job. And she just thought, you know what, since I'm leaving Barnabas, I'm going to start down here in Hunterdon. I'm going to move on the 1st of the month. I'm going to start on the 10th of the month after I get settled in the new house. She resigned her position in Livingston before the closing. Warning, the underwriter doing their final checks suddenly realized that she didn't have a job anymore. If you don't have a job, you're not qualifying for that financing. And even though she had a promise of employment, that wasn't enough. They needed to see pay stubs. And so it really caused us some problems because they couldn't close on time. She actually had to start the job, and they were gracious enough actually to have her start a little bit earlier so she could start to get her first paycheck. And because she had a strong letter from the HR department, the lender was willing to accept one paycheck just to prove that she actually was there. But I should have counseled her not to change jobs. Don't make any major purchases. Don't drive up your credit cards. People will go out and they'll start buying furniture. I can't wait to furnish this house. Don't buy furniture yet, right? Because even if you put it on layaway and you're not making payments yet, that hits your debt to income ratio, and that could change your ability to buy that house. It might not disqualify you from the financing entirely, but it might mean that you're no longer eligible for the rate that you thought you were eligible for because you're now a bigger risk to the lender. Don't increase credit card debt. Don't miss any credit card payments. Don't forget to make your last mortgage payment. There is sometimes when people say, my current house is going to get paid off at the closing, my mortgage is due the 1st, the closing is due the 15th, I'll just defer that first mortgage payment till the closing. Don't do that. What will happen is then you've missed a mortgage payment. And if you miss a mortgage payment, it is going to suddenly make you less of a good candidate to the lender. And in the final rundown, it's going to come up and it's going to hurt you. So don't do that, right? Talk to your lenders in terms of what payments should I make and all that stuff. Don't apply for new credit. Don't change bank accounts. Don't spend the money that you need for closing. Don't delay in providing the paperwork when the lender asks for it. There's a whole bunch of things that we have to proactively counsel our buyers to make sure that they're on top of and that they don't make these mistakes, because they will impact their ability to close, right? And then another one is wire fraud. Wire fraud is really becoming a big problem. There are sort of nefarious people out there who will find a way to get some sort of a worm onto your computer. Maybe they'll sneak through a bot that they've planted on your social media account or something, and they'll just start monitoring computers. And at some point, they're going to find some of those computers that have emails that indicate that the person is involved in a financial transaction. And what will happen is they'll start to take a look at those emails, and they'll start to recreate those emails, and they will send an email to your client that makes it look like it's coming from your attorney. The email signature is an exact match. The email address is almost an exact match, not quite. The most recent wire fraud that I saw, the person posed as the attorney, and the attorney's email was something like the Jones law firm. And the one that came from the scammer was the Joneses law firm, or some minor change that you would never really notice. But the email instructed them to give the accounts for the wire transfer. And they said, here's the account, here's the routing number, here's the account number, $100,000 needs to be wired into this account before the closing. Please take care of that this afternoon. And then the money is wired offshore and it's gone. There was a case in Ridgewood a couple of months ago, full cash buyer got scammed on a wire fraud and wired $560,000, and it's gone. The whole $500,000, it's gone. Now, increasingly, the FBI is getting involved in these, but the deal is done at that point, right? You don't have the money anymore. And so we've got to counsel to make sure that our buyers never wire money anywhere until they've spoken in person to the person who allegedly sent that email and confirmed those accounts with that person on the phone, and make sure the numbers are accurate. Many financial institutions now won't email wire instructions. They will only give wiring instructions over the phone to avoid this kind of fraud. But make sure that very smart, savvy people have been burned badly through wire fraud. So make sure that we're coaching and having those conversations and making sure that people don't get caught up in that. Now, your relationship with your co-broker, really important. Make sure that you set the expectations in the beginning of the relationship in terms of how often are we going to communicate, that we kind of lend ourselves out there as to be a teammate. We're all pulling in the same direction here. I would frequently say to my co-brokers, look, I know you've been doing real estate for a long time, and I'm certainly super excited to have an agent like you to work with. But the way I commonly like to do is just kind of check in like every other week, or however long we agree is accurate, just to kind of compare notes and say, hey, how are things going? What's happening with this? What's happening with that? Is there anything that I can do to help you out? If you need to have the home CO inspection done, you need somebody to kind of meet the fire inspector one day. If you can't do it, call me. Just let me know. I'll see if I can do it or have one of my people do it. You just want to have a great partnership with the agent on your other side. I'm going to tell you, the relationships that you build with the partners, your partner agents, really are going to kind of dictate what kind of career you have in this business in a lot of ways. When you get seen as the person that everybody likes to work with because you're easy to work with, you know what you're doing, and you're willing to kind of step outside of your lane if that's what needs to happen to get things done, people love to work with you. And it makes a difference in multiple bid situations in terms of which one they're going to take. I have seen many times that two deals that look similar go to the one because the listing agent says, you know what, I've worked with Sandra before and she's really terrific. And I'm pretty sure if we're working with Sandra, it's going to go smoothly. And this other person, yeah, they're giving you $5,000 more, but they kind of have a reputation of being a pain in the neck, right? It matters. And you might even consider, not that you have to, I'm just putting it out there, I used to think about closing gifts for my co-broke agent. We always think about closing gifts for our clients, our buyers and our sellers. I used to, it dawned on me one day, why not give a little something as a sign of appreciation to the other agent who was my dance partner through this whole thing? And it was a small thing. It was usually like a bottle of wine or a gift certificate for lunch in a local restaurant, but it was just something to acknowledge them, to say, hey, I really appreciate you, because if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have had this deal. You were the one who brought the buyer to us. If it wasn't for you, our offer wouldn't have been accepted. And we worked together, and I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you. Those kinds of things are those little unexpected moments in a transaction that strengthen relationships, and I would consider it. Right. And account for it, just budget for it. You just kind of build into your budget. What can you afford to do? It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be done. And then finally, ask for referrals, right? The best time to ask for a referral is after you've done something unexpected and wowed them a little bit, right? You think about that we sometimes forget, the best time to ask for a referral is while people are still in the transaction, while they're still actively engaged in it, because it's such a part of their lives that the conversation that they're having with the other people in their lives are all related to real estate transactions. You know, and when people are talking about real estate transactions, their friends and co-workers at work start to say, yeah, you know, yeah, it's exciting to hear that things are moving along for your son. My brother's actually thinking about buying a house, right? We want to ask for a referral at the time when the people in our client's life are kind of tempted to talk more about other people in their lives with real estate needs because of the fact that they are in a transaction. I use an analogy sometimes of a pregnant woman who's visibly pregnant. You know, when you're 9 months pregnant as a woman, I've never experienced this firsthand, but what I observe is that people come up and they talk about babies all the time. You're so pregnant that they just come up and they smile and they have baby conversations. When you're not visibly pregnant, people don't do that anymore. When you're not in the transaction, people don't come up and talk about real estate anymore. And so I want to ask for the referral during the transaction. I think the best time for me is always kind of leveraging that law of reciprocity. Once I do that special wow thing, once I do that popcorn letter moment, once I do that special dinner and you're kind of blown away and you call me up and you're like, that was so cool. I want to leverage the law of reciprocity in that moment, because there's a sense of, I want to do something for you as well. You know what? Hey, I'm so glad that you love that. Who do you know that I could serve in the same way? Who do you know that's looking to buy, sell, or invest in a house this year that I could kind of create that kind of special moment for as well? You're going to get more leads for those kinds of referrals if you ask for it at a time when they're excited and they're feeling good about you. Not a great time to ask for a referral when you're negotiating something still. You know, you're negotiating the home inspection and things are not going well. You know what? I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. It looks like you are going to have to replace that knob and tube wiring after all. But by the way, do you have anybody else that you could refer me to? They're going to be like, shut up, idiot. That's not what I want to hear from you right now. I want to save that request until there's a special moment for it. Last but not least, customize these checklists. Put them into command, right? And you're going to go into the command in the opportunities section, and under contracts, you're going to select stages where you can edit those. Oops, didn't mean to skip through that so quick. Where you can edit those checklists and customize those checklists, right? Put them right in command so that they're right at your fingertips. Consumer guides, same thing. On our consumer websites and our consumers apps, we can kind of build these step-by-step sequences in what to expect, customize those right into the guides so that our clients have those right at their fingertips and they know every step of the way what to expect, right? Contract to close is really where you earn your keep. How you navigate this phase is largely going to determine whether this deal gets done and what their final memories of doing business with you is like. You know, they may have had great times out with you looking at homes. They have great times buying a home and all the excitement. But what they're going to remember is the process of getting to the closing table. That's the last experience. And so we've got to control it. We've got to make sure it's a good experience for everybody. We've got to make sure that we have a positive outcome. And we've got to build in those special wow moments. Once you've done that, then you're on the pathway of having a client for life. Because now that transaction ends and they go back into your database and they feel good about you and they want to talk about you and they want to become your advocate. The root of advocate is vocate. The root of vocate is vocalization, using your voice. Advocates speak for you. They speak on your behalf. And we want our database full of advocates. And we do it by getting this thing to the closing table in this way. So it is 12 o'clock. This is where we're going to wrap it today. This is where we end Ignite 2.0. This will be recorded. This will be on the website later on today on the Bergen Partners YouTube. But as I always do, I'm always looking for a couple of ahas. Anything today, anything from this course in general, anything that stuck out that you can sort of was kind of a light bulb moment or something you're thinking differently about. I'd love to have just one or two of them today before we wrap it up. Anybody want to unmute?
Hi, Hal.
Sandra, how are you?
Good, good, good. So what stood out for me today was how important it is for the buyers not to leave their job or switch or, you know, make a large purchase. Like,
oh my goodness, yeah.
How important that is. That's something so important to relay.
And you know what happened to me early on? God's honest truth. I was just about 2 weeks away from closing, and it was a pretty large purchase, and it was early in my career. And the guy had money, and he bought a 26-foot sailboat before we closed. And I'm like, ah! I hope there's a sleeping cabin on there because I don't know if you can get this house anymore, right? Yeah. I gotta control that differently, and it's just a checklist thing. And a lot of time we don't really think about that, and people get excited and they just make mistakes, right? Right. So I see Rick working with the co-broker, putting aside any difference and just getting the deal done. You know what? At the end of the day, it's got to be 100%, 100%. I got to be all in. And if I can't count on you to do what needs to happen, then you know what? Then I'm going to do it myself. And I'm going to remember that the next time I have an opportunity to accept an offer from you. But right now, it's going to be whatever it takes because my client needs it to happen. And if it means I have to do something that isn't my job, so be it. It's the way, that's life, man. We're going to move on, right? Anything else? If not, we'll probably just park it right here.